Asia is reeling from the fresh tariffs announced by the Trump administration on goods imported into the US. Half of the 10 countries and territories hit with the highest tariffs are from this region. Well, let's take a look. Developing economy Cambodia has it the worst with 49%, Laos 48%, Vietnam, Myanmar and Thailand not far behind. China, in this round of tariffs, got 34%. That's on top of an existing 20%. Indonesia at 32% and Singapore, one of the lowest, like Australia. Well, let's find out more from Mark Humphery-Jenner, an Associate Professor of Finance at UNSW Sydney. Now, Mark, why have countries in Southeast Asia been targeted with the highest tariffs?
Well, some of these tariffs have been extremely high. So if we're looking, for example, at Vietnam, it was hit with 46%. China was hit with another 34% on top of the 20% it was already hit with. Now, this largely seems to be driven by the US looking at the trade deficit it has. The trade deficit is when you're importing more from a country than you're exporting to it. So, for example, it has a trade deficit with Vietnam, meaning Vietnam is exporting more to the US than it is bringing in from the US itself. So the US seems to be particularly concerned about the situation where it is buying a lot from a country, but not able to sell very much. And hence why many of these Southeast Asian countries have been hit with such high tariffs.
Do you think indirectly also it could be targeting trade rival China, which with the previous tariffs, previously with the first Trump administration, it moved a lot of its manufacturing to some of these Southeast Asian nations?
Certainly, some of the tariffs could be an attempt to either directly or indirectly capture some of the trade that would have been going from China. So, for example, Nike had been manufacturing a lot of its goods in China, but with the tariffs imposed on China, it shifted some production to Vietnam. Now, the tariffs are now going to capture the trade coming out of Vietnam. And this is why Nike's stock price declined some 14% on the tariffs coming in. Certainly was an attempt to get on top of those suppliers.
Can you tell us a bit more about the extra tariffs that China will cop? An extra 34% on top of the 20% that was announced in the first round, but that won't impact all goods going into the US from China?
Yes, so the China tariffs, well, it is that 34% on top of the 20%, but it doesn't necessarily apply to everything. For example, steel and aluminium, they're subject to their own tariffs, and that appears to be driven by the US's desire to reshore production of those things, although how successful that will be remains to be seen. After all, the US doesn't have very much bauxite, and bauxite is necessary to make aluminium, which is why Australia is one of the most competitive countries for making those products. But it is, well, the tariffs are covering a lot, but not necessarily everything.
Well, presumably a lot of goods made in China will soon become cheaper for countries other than the US now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a concern, in fact, that many Southeast Asian countries have about dumping of goods from China. I'll give you an example. China makes quite a bit of steel, but there's also steel being made in Vietnam. So there were concerns that perhaps Chinese steel is going to be dumped into the Vietnamese market or potentially will lower prices for them. Certainly could create that situation as China is looking for some other export partners.
Mark Humphery-Jenner, really good to get your expertise. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great being with you.